When I reviewed the Hyundai Ioniq 5 last year, I called it the absolute best value EV you can buy in Malaysia. And now comes its sedan brother, the Ioniq 6. If anything, this looks even more unique, and it has an outstanding claim of over 600 kilometers of range. This here is the 2023 World Car of the Year, following up on the Ioniq 5's win just the year before. So right here on Malaysian roads, with Malaysian pricing, is it actually all that good? How does it compare to the Ioniq 5? And can it actually do 600 kilometers on a single charge? Let's find out all that and more in this video. Now let's start with prices. First, the max rear-wheel drive starts from 290,000 ringgit, while the max all-wheel drive is 320,000 ringgit. But that's only with the standard 2-year warranty. So obviously you'd want to upgrade to the 5-year extended warranty and service package for an extra 10,000 ringgit. So now this becomes 300,000 and the all-wheel drive becomes 330,000 ringgit. That is about 10% more than the Ioniq 5. And it's quite a bit more than its closest rival, the BMW i4. Since the initial launch, Hyundai has introduced two more affordable variants, the light rear-wheel drive for 220,000 and the plus rear-wheel drive for 250. However, both are lower spec variants with a smaller battery and less range, so it's far better to stick to the max variants. So clearly, this isn't a cheap or a value-driven car. And if you look beyond EVs, at this price, this car goes against the BMW 3 Series and the Mercedes-Benz C-Class. That is an ultra-competitive market here in Malaysia. But then again, this really isn't your typical or conventional sedan choice. While most EVs in Malaysia take the form of a jacked-up hatchback crossover SUVs, sedans are actually still quite rare in the market. And while technically this is called a sedan, I don't really see it that way. It doesn't have that traditional 3-box sedan shape, especially around the back, where it sort of looks like a downturned banana of sorts. To me, this reminds me of the original Mercedes-Benz CLS, the OG of 4-door coupes. But here, Hyundai has taken that concept and completely ran away with it to an absolute extreme. You can call it cool, funny, weird, whatever you want, but there is no denying that this is a unique looking car. You'll either love it or hate it. Me, myself, I'm not quite a big fan of it, but I know quite a lot of people who think this is the coolest thing ever. Where do you stand? Let me know in the comments below. But there's a reason why it's shaped that way. This car's design is entirely dictated by Aerodynamics. That's the reason why it's got that weird butt. That's also why the front end dips down so low, almost like a supercar. The Ioniq 6 has a drag coefficient of as low as 0.21 CD. That makes it one of the most aerodynamic cars ever designed. But while clearly that is very impressive on a technical level, in terms of styling, this car is very simple. It's not quite as prominent as the Ioniq 5, I think. There's no front grille, the lights have a very simple shape, and the entire front end doesn't really have all that many styling cues. At the bottom, it's fully closed up, but those are actually active vents that open or close depending on the car's cooling requirements. That is certainly cool, but when everything is closed up like this, it doesn't really have that much of a character to look at, I think. Pretty much everything has been done to cut the drag on the front end of the car. Even all the panel gaps have been stuffed with rubber linings. As you know, when it comes to EVs, aero efficiency is doubly important. The easier this car cuts through the air, the lower the drag and the higher the range. So clearly, that's what the designers had in mind when they made this thing. The base Ioniq 6 rear-wheel drive is all about the range. That's why it rides on the smallest 18-inch aero wheel option. But unlike other EV wheels with a similar closed-up design, you won't find any cheapo plastic covers on this one. The 20-inch alloys on the all-wheel drive version looks far better than this, but in the name of the extra comfort and range, I'd happily live with this look. The standard tires though, I'm not very happy with because these rides on EV-specific Nexons. I think when any car carries a premium price, naturally you would expect premium tires as well. So while the Ioniq 5 Max rides on Michelins, the 6 all-wheel drive rides on Pirellis, I don't think it's right that this has more budget tires. If I were to buy this car, that's gonna be the first thing I change. The Ioniq 6 rides on Hyundai's eGMP dedicated EV platform, the same as on the Ioniq 5 and the Kia EV6, but with a wheelbase of 2950mm. That is actually 50mm shorter than the Ioniq 5, but 50mm longer than the EV6. That's 3 models with similar sizes but with 3 different wheelbases. Just goes to show how modular Hyundai's EV skateboard platform is. That's pretty cool. The back end definitely has a lot more going for it in terms of design, but it's still deep within the love it or hate it category. The double spoiler setup especially reminds me of old school Porsche 911 whale-tails, so that adds on a little bit of a cool factor to it, but overall, yeah, again, I'm just not a big fan of this look. But what I do like are the lighting elements on this car. The per pixel design on the full width LED taillights looks superb, as are the vertical fog and reverse light clusters. The top third brake light especially look absolutely gorgeous in the dark. Thankfully, the Ioniq 6 is far more conventional, less wild, less crazy in here. This has a very familiar layout as per the Ioniq 5, but in comparison, I think this looks far more modern of the two. The biggest difference, of course, is the black and silver bezel around the two widescreen displays. This to me looks far better than the full white box on the Ioniq 5. Moving further down, this is pretty much the exact same control center as in the 5. That is to say, touch-based controls for the aircon controls, but at least it is always there. It's not embedded within the screen, so I'm pretty happy with that. And then you've also got this nice strip of plastic over here with sort of ripple design. That looks fantastic, and the same element is also extended within the door cards themselves. Now the 6 has a fantastic use of ambient lighting. You see lights glowing from the doors, around the dashboard itself. At night in the dark, this looks absolutely stunning. Way better than the pretty stoic Ioniq 5. There are a few key differences as well. The 4 dots on the steering wheel now changes colors depending on your drive mode. Say you set in sport, it lights up in red. That looks pretty neat. And then you've got the door cards, which has been completely redesigned. All the window controls have been moved to the center console over here, very similar to, you know, old school Mercedes-Benz and BMW models. So that frees up space to make the door cards way thinner than before. So as you sit in this car, you've got way more knee room on your right side or the left side for the front passenger. This does make the whole cabin feel more airy. But there is also a big flaw with this concept, because by making the entire door card so much thinner, they've also made the door pockets below fairly thin as well. It barely fits a standard size mineral water bottle. That is bad. Plus, by having major controls on the center console over here, this whole thing now is permanent. It's no longer slidable, movable like in the 5. I've always been a fan of the cool feature in the 5, but here I don't really miss it because this setup works just as well. You get plenty of cubby bins down here, 2 cup holders for your phones or whatever, and this massive bin down there for your handbags, laptop bags, and so on. It works really well. Moving on to the infotainment system, this looks like a very bare basic OS, almost too simple compared to cars like, say, the Tesla Model Y. But you know what? I think this works quite well. There's a nice feature called Quiet Mode, which basically mutes all the speakers on the back end of the car. This is if you have a child or a friend sleeping in the back, so the car only plays music very softly for the front passengers. That's nice to have. And of course, you've got proper Apple CarPlay support, full screen as well. It looks good, very easy to use, nice and snappy. But unfortunately, this uses a full cable support, which I just don't understand. The much older Hyundai Kona from a couple of years ago already had wireless CarPlay back then. So this being the latest EV from Hyundai, I just don't understand why this is still using a wired connection. Other than that, this car's full surround view parking cameras is excellent. It really is pin sharp, especially at night. And audio plays through a Bose sound system. If I remember correctly, it sounds a little bit better than in the Ioniq 5. Perhaps this has better acoustics, or maybe they've done a few adjustments here and there. But yeah, it just sounds much clearer than in the previous model. Other than that, you will notice that our Malaysian market models run the standard side mirrors instead of the far fancier digital cameras instead. I don't think that is such a bad idea, but this does leave the big blank pieces on either ends of the dashboard looking a little bit awkward. In other markets, that's where the camera feed would display on. Here, it just looks empty. Another feature missing in Malaysia is the Blue Link app support, which would have allowed you to monitor the car's range and charging status on the go. I think if Hyundai is serious about EVs in Malaysia, they really have to look into this soon. One thing I do have to show you is the key fob. Now, this may look like a really weird design at first, but you put it on the side and yeah, that is the Hyundai logo. And then down here, you've got buttons for the smart parking control system. Basically, if for whatever reason a jerk has parked really close to your car that you can't open the doors properly, you can use this system to drive the car out automatically for you to open the door. This is a really nice feature. It's been around for Hyundais for quite some time now, but we've never had it before, so this is the first model to get this in Malaysia. The gear selector is exactly the same as on the Ioniq 5. There is this rather phallic stub on the right side of the steering wheel. All you have to do is twist the knob forward if you want to drive, or twist it backwards for reverse. This is a very simple concept to get used to. What's not so great are the front seats. I think they just don't feel anywhere near as comfortable as on the Ioniq 5. Those feel softer, wider, more supportive. This sort of feels a bit more sporty, body hugging, I suppose. But I think for long distance journeys, it's just nowhere near as comfortable. This does have the relaxation seat option like in the 5 as well, but it doesn't go as far. For instance, you do lose out on the bottom ottoman on the front seat, so yeah, even at a full stretch, it's just not quite as cozy as in the 5. That's quite a pity. But you'll want to forgive all that as soon as you step in the back. Just look at the amount of legroom that I have. I think this is pretty much S-Class level of legroom for less than half the price. But in terms of headroom, this car is very limited. I am only 167 centimeters tall, but even then my hair is already touching the headliner over here. That's mostly to do with the swooping roofline of this car, of course, but that's not really that big of a problem in the real world because there's so much legroom in here, there's so much foot space. You can just slouch down a little bit, slide forward and enjoy, quite a fair bit of headroom. That's not an issue at all. What I don't really like, however, is the high floor back here. So if I were to sit up straight, my knees up in the air, I don't get much thigh support. It's just not a very comfortable place to sit for long journeys. But yeah, like I said, just lounge back, push your feet forward, and yeah, this is not too bad. This high floor issue is common among most EVs, and that is because in most modern EV skateboard platforms, the battery pack is placed on the base of the platform, and that pushes the floor further up. That is why it's a lot easier to package an EV SUV rather than a sedan, but Hyundai has just managed to do so rather well, I think. But when it comes to the boot, the Ioniq 6 isn't all that good. There's only about 400 liters of space over here, which is tiny for a sedan this big. Even worse than that, the actual aperture is actually very narrow, and the load lip is as high as most SUVs, so you really have to lift your things up high before you drop it in. You do have some storage under the floor, but it barely fits your Type 2 charging cable and not much else. Thankfully, you do get a secondary boot up front with 45 liters of extra space in the rear-wheel drive, or just 14 liters in the all-wheel drive version. There is no spare tire on this car, instead you just get a tire repair kit. Well, anyway, let's go drive this thing. So as usual, let's talk about the powertrain first. This being the rear-wheel drive version that is just a single motor powering the rear wheels. This is rated at 228 PS. and 350 Newton meters of torque. Now that doesn't sound all that impressive, especially when it comes to EVs, where it's common to see numbers like 400 horsepower, 500 even. Even when it comes to performance, this car takes quite a long time to get from 0 to 100, 7.4 seconds. This is as opposed to, 4, 5, 6 seconds in most other EVs out there. But having said that, 7.4 seconds in an EV feels completely different compared to a regular ICE model. I mean, the figure is pretty comparable to, say, a Mercedes-Benz C200 or a BMW 320i. But driving this thing, planting a foot down, the car shooting forward, it feels about the same or perhaps even faster than a C300 and a 330i. So the Ioniq 6, even the slower rear-wheel drive version, is not short of performance. This car in sport mode is properly explosive, it's properly fast. I don't think I would ever need more performance than what this car offers right now. It's properly quick, this car. If you do insist on having more performance, however, you can of course get the all-wheel drive version. That adds on a second electric motor for the front axle, making it all-wheel drive, and that boosts up your power outputs up to 325 PS and 605 Newton meters of torque. And 0 to 100 goes down to 5.1 seconds. That's more like it for EVs, I suppose. But like I said, I don't need it. 7.4, this rear-wheel drive is more than quick enough. But I will say this, between the three driving modes on the Ioniq 6, Eco, Normal and Sport, the level of acceleration available is just totally different. It's like night and day difference. In Eco mode, you plant your foot down, the car surges forward, that's fine. But if you do the same thing in Sport, it really snaps your neck back. There is such a massive difference. I'm not such a big fan of this because with EVs, I tend to drive in the most economical driving mode available. So in this car, it's always Eco most of the time. But if I do that, I don't get access to the hardest acceleration that this car can offer. I think when it comes to this, I much prefer Volvo's concept of having a one-size-fits-all driving mode. But on the flip side, the extra level of granularity available on the Ioniq 6 is also something that a lot of people like. For instance, you can choose between 5 different brake regen settings on this car, including I-pedal or the single pedal driving mode in the Hyundai. I think it's nice to have options in this case instead of being, stuck between having regen on or off, again, like in the Volvo. Now let's talk about energy consumption, because here the Ioniq 6 is just absolutely outstanding. I've driven this car over 300 kilometers through a mixture of roads, a lot of traffic jams, a lot of my regular everyday routes driving to and fro the office, and this car managed to average just 13.1 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. That is far lower than pretty much all other EVs that I've driven here on Malaysian roads. I mean, both the Ioniq 5 and the Kia EV6, I average around 17 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. This is 13. That's about a 25% difference right there. That just goes to show how much energy you are wasting by insisting on having a big bulky SUV instead of a low-slung sedan. So all that aero efficiency tricks on the outside, that definitely works. This car is the better for it. At an average of 13.1 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, if you compare that against this car's battery capacity of 77.4 kilowatt hours, I can work out a maximum range based on my own driving pattern at up to 590 kilometers on a single charge. That is very close to Hyundai's claim of 617 kilometers. That is absolutely amazing, I think, and I got 13.1 without even trying. I'm pretty sure if I, do a little bit of hypermiling, I can get it below 13, and it can easily surpass its claim of over 600 kilometers. That's just unbelievable. Now onto charging, and this car has a lot of advantages over most other EVs out there. When it comes to AC, it's pretty much par for the course. This has an 11 kilowatt onboard charger, so that takes about 8 hours for a full charge. That's pretty much standard for a car of this size, of this price. But when it comes to DC, it is outstanding. Now, Hyundai claims that with this car's 800 volt electrical architecture, it can take up to 350 kilowatts DC charging. But in the real world, even if you plug it up to one of those high power 350 kilowatt chargers, this car will max out at around 220 kilowatts, not much more than that. But even then, you'll go from 10 to 80% in far less than half an hour, much quicker than most of its rivals, not including, of course, its close relative, the Ioniq 5 and the EV6. Those are just as quick. But remember, in terms of battery size, this gets the latest 77.4 pack instead of the more outdated smaller pack in the existing Ioniq 5. Now let's talk about driving dynamics, because there is just a night and day difference between this and the Ioniq 5. It truly feels like two completely different companies set up the ride and handling packages of the two cars. That is just mind-boggling. While the Ioniq 5 was just purely focused on comfort with little care on driving dynamics, the Ioniq 6 feels far more planted. There's a lot more feel and heft on the steering wheel. There's a lot better body control as well. This, as a driver's car, is far more enjoyable than the Ioniq 5. But obviously it's still nowhere near as dynamic as a BMW i4, a Mercedes EQE and so on. There is still a little bit of that loose bouncing feeling going on if you go through bumps, through corners. This does feel a little less controlled than, you know, those properly European tuned models. But compared to the 5 or even the Kia EV6, this is a much better car to drive day in and day out. But as you know, there is a price to pay for that, because this being a much lower slung sedan, there's a lot less travel in the suspension system. This does feel a lot stiffer, a lot busier in terms of ride compared to the Ioniq 5 and even the EV6. I'm not gonna say this feels uncomfortable, because as soon as you hit, say, 30-40 kilometers and above, it's fine, it's okay. But below that, especially if you're going through those small, rubber speed breakers, this can be painful. Me personally, I much prefer the Ioniq 5's comfort-oriented ride quality, but I know for a fact a lot of people will prefer this package instead. So yeah, you have to drive them both to see which one you prefer. One thing about visibility though, you do feel like you're sitting very low in this car, almost like in a low slung sports car. You can see from there that my knees are angled almost straight forward instead of, further down like in SUVs or taller cars. Over here, you feel like you are sitting very low in the car, and that sort of limits the visibility around you as well, especially with the bonnet dropping down so dramatically up front. Even if I were to do this, I can't see the corners of the car. So parking this car, moving around traffic, moving around tight parking maneuvers is slightly more tricky than in quite a few other cars. But thankfully, like I've said, this car's parking cameras are just about one of the best in the business. But there is another major complaint. There is a big speaker board behind the rear seats, and as good as it sounds, it reflects back onto the rear windscreen, and yeah, that really limits your view out. I think that can be dangerous at times. Now let's talk about Refinement, because this is just simply outstanding. It's far better than the Ioniq 5. Even in terms of road noise, there is a fair bit of tire noise, tire roar coming into the cabin. I think that can't really be helped, especially with the semi-budget tires that this car has right now. But in terms of wind noise, there's practically none. I'm going at 90 right now, and if you put aside the tire roar, there's absolutely no wind noise coming into the cabin at all. It's pin drop silent. This is far quieter than Ioniq 5 and most other EVs out there, but perhaps the Mercedes EQS and the BMW iX, the top end of EVs. Compared against any other EV, this is quieter. Last but not least, let's talk about the active safety systems on this car. Like the Ioniq 5, this has the entire suite adaptive cruise control, autonomous emergency braking, active lane keep assist, blind spot monitor, everything, so on and so on. This car's got everything. But in operation, this works much better than most other cars. The way the steering wheel hugs the center of the lane especially is impressive. This feels far more refined than most other non-premium car brands, and I think this is a match to the absolute best of them. Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Volvo, this is as good as every single one of them. Just take a look at the car right now. I'm not touching the steering wheel at all, but it is nicely taking the corner very smoothly instead of older systems where it tugs at the steering wheel. It feels very jerky. This is so smooth. It feels like a real person is driving this car. This is fantastic. And even better than that, you can even use the adaptive cruise control and active lane keep assist separately in this car. In most other cars, the active steering system comes in together with adaptive cruise control. You can't have active steering without cruise control. With this one, the two features are completely unlinked. So if you want, you can control the brakes and throttle as you would normally do, but having the car control the steering as you drive along. This to me makes driving just so much more relaxing. Whether I'm just driving to work or going on the highways, this is such a good feature to have, way better than having everything linked together. So that's my full review of the Hyundai Ioniq 6 here in Malaysia. Overall, I think this is a thoroughly excellent EV for those looking for a long-distance electric vehicle. Its power consumption is truly outstanding. With my normal driving cycle, I average just 13 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, far lower than pretty much all other EVs I've driven through the same roads. And without even trying, I can easily get very close to the 600 kilometer range claim. That just goes to show how much power the SUV form factor is wasting. With EVs, sedan is the way to go. I also like the clear choice given to customers between performance and range. And when it comes to EVs, myself, I would always prioritize range. Even better than that, both variants are also specced out in the max specifications, so it's not like the bottom variant is just dumped down in terms of equipment list. That is great news. Other than that, even the slower rear-wheel drive version has more than enough performance for everyday driving. The dynamics is pretty decent and the interior is just absolutely massive. This is the complete package. It may ride a little bit too stiff or a little bit too busy for my liking, definitely far less comfortable than Ioniq 5, but I think most people will be happy to accept that trade-off for the better driving dynamics. Lastly, the price is perhaps a little bit too high compared to the BMW i4, and especially now that Tesla is here. But overall, I think you do get a lot of car for your money. This is one of the better EVs you can buy in Malaysia today. So for now, what do you think of this review? What do you think of the car? Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you for watching and stay safe, everyone.